Hello and welcome to Suzi's Book Bag, hosted by me, Suzi Fay. I've gone for my good old Penguin Classics book bag here because among various other topics, we are going to be talking about an absolutely wonderful Penguin Classic book. And to talk about it, I have a good friend in the book bag. It is the music critic, journalist, broadcaster, Kevin Le Gendre. He is an expert on all aspects of Black music and knows a hell of a lot about Black literature as well. In fact, he used to review a lot for me back in the day at The Independent on Sunday. So it's always great to catch up with Kevin and see what he's up to. He's always busy. So let's welcome Kevin into the book bag. Hello.
Hi, Suzi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's a good time to be starting this conversation because Notting Hill Carnival is not too far behind us.
Yeah.
And, you are the author of a book called Don't Stop the Carnival. Yeah. So I know it looms large. Were you at the celebrations this year? How did it all go?
I wasn't this year. Because I had one too many things to do, and also, to be perfectly honest, in the last sort of 10 years or so, I found Carnival, because of the numbers now, a bit overwhelming. It's so much bigger. It's now billed as Europe's biggest street party, as you know. So I think for some people, and myself included, it just feels like too much of it's just too many people in a relatively small space. I mean, the last time I went pre-pandemic was about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I actually went to, and this is an important thing, I went to Panorama, which is the annual steel band competition that takes place on the Friday, which is a really, really important part of Carnival, which isn't talked about so much. The whole tradition of the steel bands, the excellence of the steel bands, and this like very, very high standard of musicianship. The competition that takes place every year, which features these famous steel bands like Ebony and Mangrove and Glissando, these very, very famous steel bands who've been developing their art for a number of years, to see them all come together and to see bands that sometimes have 60 or 70 players, all in one space, all competing for this prize is, to me, that is still an essential part of Carnival, which, as I say, doesn't really make the news if you think about what's reported in the images that we see of the floats and the parades and the costumes, which are important. But for me, in fact, the last time I went, it was Panorama.
Right. I think the numbers are now up to 2 million, which is absolutely staggering. I guess that's over the whole 3 days. But, the streets are narrow down there, aren't they? Absolutely. I imagine you kind of get funneled along. And I love the idea of the costumes and the music, but yes, the idea of being penned in like that would not be my favorite thing. But Carnival has so many meanings, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, in Trinidad, it's a sense of celebration and a sense of empowerment for ordinary people. If you go right back to its origins, Carnival was basically that day in the year when slaves had the opportunity to parade, to have a taste of freedom for a day, and to also parody and satirize and poke fun at slave masters. So the political aspect of Carnival, the subversive aspect of it is very, very important. That sense of people who basically are very, very low down in society. I mean, if you're a slave, then you're the lowest of the low. People who aren't enfranchised, becoming enfranchised just for that moment in time. And then the way that it's developed into a very complex, multi-layered art form, which is about music, it's about costume making, it's about the calypso competition, the use of political satire, all these things that are woven into Carnival. You see that it's a phenomenon. I think that's the word which is appropriate. Certainly in Trinidad, it's not just jumping up, as we say, and having a good time. It's also about political commentary, and it's about that sense of freedom. It's about empowerment, and it's about people working all year round, and then having this unbelievable sense of release on the day itself. I know we're gonna talk about that when we get onto some of these great novels, but
yeah,
that degree of really letting off steam, just being able to express and externalize, I suppose, the daily tension that you have. And if you go right back to the origins, that's the tension from slavery through to colonialism, through to the post-colonial period, the inherent stresses and strains that you have in a former colony, where there's been repression, where there's been brutality. All of that is woven, it's kind of soaked into the marrow of Carnival in Trinidad. So that very, very intense feeling, with the energy exploding, it's also in something that doesn't happen in this country, but it's very important in Trinidad. It's what we call Juve, which is the pre-carnival celebration, where people are up at dawn, just in the days before Carnival, covered in mud, meeting the sunrise again, feeling that sense of ritual. That was the word I was looking for. Ritual is a key part of Carnival, and celebrating themselves, celebrating what it is to be Trinidadian, what it is to assert yourself, to exercise a degree of independence and freedom. That's really it. I can't explain it any other way.
Yeah. Well, your book, Don't Stop the Carnival, is just the first volume, isn't it? In a pretty mighty task you've set yourself, if I may say so.
It's Herculean.
Yeah. So really. Much so, we're waiting a long time for volume 2, but just take us through what you've covered so far.
Well, volume 1 is kind of black music as it's developed in England, going right back to the Middle Ages, through the interwar period, right through to the post-war period, going up to the mid-60s, end of the 60s. So it's an overview of the many types of black music that we've had in this country. And I suppose it's also an opportunity for me to challenge certain perceptions of how we define black music in this country. First and foremost, I think what was really uppermost in my mind when I sat down to plan the book out and the initial stages of me having discussions with the editor is that I think the prevailing perception that we have of black music in Britain, as soon as we say that, we automatically think of black music derived from either the Caribbean or maybe Africa. So you think of ska, reggae, high life music, Afrobeat, which are all really, really important. You think of the influence of Jamaica, Ghana, Nigeria, former colonies. But what is equally important is the presence of Black America in Black Britain, and the huge contribution made by African American musicians, going right back to the Fifth Jubilee Singers in the 19th century, one of the first gospel groups or practitioners of Negro spirituals, as it was known at the time. And throughout history, you see the presence of Black Americans, of African Americans, alongside Caribbeans, West Indians, and Africans. And to me, that's a fundamental part of what black music in Britain is. It's the way that you have the diaspora coming together. As I say, I think primarily it's interesting, it's very appropriate that we talked about Notting Hill, about Carnival, because we do. I mean, anytime I speak to people about black music in Britain, I mention my book, if they ask me about it, the first thing they always say is, oh, you mean ska, reggae, Afrobeat, high life. They never think about Black America. They don't, and relatively few people know about the Fifth Jubilee Singers. you know, who, as far as I'm concerned, were a very, very important part of the history of black music in this country. And then even equally, if not more important than the Fifth Jubilee Singers, and this person that I'm about to mention is a major part of the book, Paul Robeson. So yes. Paul Robeson, as I'd say, a national icon, certainly in Wales. He became one of the favoured sons of Wales. You know, they took him to their hearts. He's a majestic singer, a great actor, a huge presence in British theatre. If you think about Paul Robeson on stage doing Showboat in 1928 or 29 or thereabouts, being in the film, being in the Proud Valley. Also, very importantly, and this kind of connects several strands of the book as well, being a political figure.
Absolutely.
So this connection between politics and music, people expressing anti-establishment, anti-colonial thoughts, anti-racist thoughts through music, that kind of runs through the whole book. And Robeson is the real embodiment of that, the real epitome of that, to the extent that, well, he was also a communist. The Americans removed his passport and kind of grounded him at one point, I think in the 50s. I mean, he's such an interesting story. He was pursued by the House of Un-American Activities, not allowed to travel. He was deemed a threat to national security. So given the fact that this ban was placed upon him, there was a famous, excuse me, in the late 50s, it's the transatlantic telephone concert, whereby he was actually in a studio in America, and he sang down the line to an audience in, I think the first one was in, it might have been St Pancras Town Hall, somewhere like that, and then there was another one as well, possibly in Wales, but he managed to beat the ban through technology. And I think there was such a strength of feeling in this country towards him as a national icon that, you know, when it was announced that Paul Robeson was going to be performing this concert down a telephone line, it made an audience flock to London. I'm pretty certain it was St Pancras Town Hall to be able to hear him. So Robeson is very much, he's like a wandering spirit throughout the book. And as I say, when I did my initial planning, I thought about these key figures. So the other one who, again, springs to mind for a lot of people is Lord Kitchener. The iconic image of him arriving on the Windrush, and we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of it. He's on the deck of the ship as it docks in Tilbury. He's singing "London is the Place for Me," an absolutely seminal moment in the history of Britain. And that was 1948, obviously. I suppose my task was to think about what happened before and what happened after, and try and establish a line of continuity, look at various themes that emerged as a result.
Because there's, I was fascinated to read about the Henry VIII had a black musician.
Yeah, I mean, many of the court figures, many of the kings and queens, they had black musicians. They had black musicians in Scotland at the court. They had if you go to Hampton Court, you'll actually see on I think it is a baronial roll, a black trumpeter called John Blanket. You know, so it goes right back to the Middle Ages. It goes back to Tudor Britain as well, where these black musicians were present, you know, and in some cases they were at the court. So
at the center of everything.
Well, it just goes to show that how deeply embedded in British history, black history, and black music history is. It's as simple as that. It's not something which is marginalized. I mean, there's been a struggle to have it accepted. There's been a struggle for commercial success. There's been a struggle against racism in the music industry, which goes on to this day. But certainly the presence of black musicians and the presence of black people in Britain is not something that starts with the Windrush. Definitely not. I mean, that in terms of breaking down certain stereotypes and hopefully changing the way people think, that was also an overarching theme in the book, that we've been here for an awful long time. It's not so much how long have we been here, but when were we not here? I think that was, and the more research I did, the more I was astounded to find all these different instances of black musicians or black writers. Ignatius Sancho, I think and Equiano, these people, they were very interested in the arts, as well as in freedom struggles, as well as in abolition and things like that. So you have this intersection between culture and activism.
And I'm thinking also of Bernardine Evaristo and her wonderful novel The Emperor's Babe, which I think you might even have reviewed it for me.
Yeah.
But novel in verse about ancient Rome, what Roman Britain and black presence there.
I do argue. I think that it's worth making this argument that possibly the very first black musicians in this country were found during Roman Britain. If you go back to the Roman occupation of Britain, because the Romans expanded throughout Europe and into North Africa, and they recruited from the various territories that they conquered. They had Mauritanian, I think, Libyan soldiers as well, centurions, members of the army. And that's this. So this is another strand in the book. You find the presence of black musicians in the military, all throughout history. The West India Regiment, First World War, Second World War. Some really great calypso singers. Frank Holder, who was also he was in what was he in? I think the RAF. He was either in the RAF or the army during the Second World War. Entered Sam Manning, another calypso singer from Trinidad. He also entertained the troops. So to go back to the original point, the Mauritanians, the Moorish figures in the Roman army, there would have been drummers amongst them. The battalions had percussion players and drummers, possibly trumpeters as well. So it's entirely likely that those very first black musicians were drummers in the Roman army.
Incredible.
Yeah, there you go.
So volume 2 in preparation and eagerly awaited. I mean, that's much more kind of in, you must be interviewing the people themselves, which you obviously can't interview a Tudor trumpeter or anything like that.
Yeah, there's much more face-to-face research, and there is the kind of shaking the dust off old books in libraries or wherever I find them, the kind of serious detective work, and you find out your facts and figures and all the rest of it. But the advantage of doing the second volume is because it's much more contemporary, it's much nearer to us. I'm picking up at the end of the 60s, going into the 70s. Some very important people are still alive, and I've had the opportunity to speak to them, which has been really, really enjoyable thus far. I still have a bit to do, but just a quick rejoinder to what you were saying earlier on, that the reason why this is taking a bit longer is because I wrote another book in between about the music of Jimi Hendrix.
Right. Yeah.
And he actually featured in the first book as well, just at the end, because obviously he's a major part of black music in Britain, and it goes back to my previous point about this relationship between Black Britain and Black America. But yeah, being able to speak to musicians who are still alive, being able to talk to them about both the music that they were making and also what it was like to be in the industry at that point in time has been a revelation. So yeah, it's exciting.
I'm not piling the pressure on, Kevin. It'll come in its own good time and be
Sure.
brilliant. I know you've got a lot of work on. I wanted to ask you about your work as a music critic. How did that begin? How did that come about? Is it you've just always listened to music from a very young age?
Always listened to music from a young age. I didn't really have any ambitions to be a writer or to be a journalist at all. I wanted to be, I think the chosen profession that I had, certainly when I graduated after studying French, was to be a teacher. That was it. I wanted to be a teacher, and I did become a teacher for a while, and I still teach now. Ironically, I teach the history of music at Trinidadian Conservatoire, or music history in context. But growing up in a household where there was a lot of music, where there was a lot of calypso, soca, soul, funk, a little bit of jazz that my parents listened to as well. And then my brothers got me into music. So we were always listening to music. And then, as I say, after studying and after sort of going into education, I actually worked at the Open University for a while as well. That was one of my first serious jobs, because I did a BA in French studies at Lancaster University, and then I did an MA in French theatre at Bristol University. So I really thought I was destined for academia. And I lived in Senegal in West Africa for a year. I taught English there. And then when I came back, for some reason, I just thought maybe academia is not entirely what I want to do, but I want to be involved in education. So I got this job. It was a really interesting job at the Open University in Milton Keynes. So I used to produce audio material for a French course that they did. So that was my first BBC job. And then when my contract came to an end, I'm just working out, retracing my steps. This is exactly what happened. When my contract came to an end, I moved to London and I tried to get another job in BBC Education, and that didn't quite work out. And then by luck and chance, I ended up just meeting people as you do, and writing initially for a publication called The Weekly Journal, which was a subsidiary of The Voice, Britain's long-standing black newspaper. And for I suppose it was just a little strange twist of fate. They had an opening for somebody who wanted to write about arts and culture and music, and that was me. I just happened to come along at the right time. And a few years after that, I started writing for Echoes magazine, a long-standing black music publication in this country. And then it was Suzi Faye and The Independent on Sunday. So it was just a very unexpected turn of events, because none of it was planned. And I didn't study journalism at uni or go to college or anything. I think I had to get through a certain amount of imposter syndrome. It's like, but you haven't studied journalism. You're just making this up as you go along. It's like, yeah, but
well, I advise people. I mean, I've taught journalism, and I advise people to come from the area of their expertise.
Right.
Certainly in arts journalism, there's something you're passionate about. If it's music, the kind of journalistic skills can come on top of that, but the love comes first, I think.
Yeah, well, the love has always been there, and the engagement has always been there. So I suppose I've been lucky enough to just have that background, people sharing music with me. Certainly, my parents and my family, and then friends, and just listening to a lot of music over the years. I suppose that to a certain extent was the training, even though, as you well know, there's the very important and very demanding aspect of being able to write well and write analytically and write with a degree of insight. And I always say to people when they ask me about this that I'm still learning how to do it. I mean, I hope that I always keep learning how to do it and just get better and better. But I'm very aware of how these two things have to cohere. You have to be able to connect your specialist knowledge and all of the insight that you might have for a particular subject with the ability to communicate well. To be able to, I think certainly with music as well, it's very difficult to write about because it essentially remains something which is quite abstract. You're dealing with notes and tones which disappear, as the great Eric Dolphy said. Music is in the air and then it's gone. So anytime I'm listening to something and thinking about how to write about it, I always find myself embarking upon a memory exercise. It's fascinating, really. Okay, what did you just hear? Because no matter how many times you listen to a piece of music, it ends. So you're always working on your memory. I think that's what I find really compelling about it. It's like, what did I just hear? It's not like looking at a painting where it's right in front of you. The music starts, it progresses, and then it ends. And I'm not one of those people who likes to write about music when it's on in the background. I can't write and listen at the same time. I have to listen and then write, which means that once I've listened, I'm working on my memory.
Yeah.
And that in itself is a fascinating exercise for me. Thinking, okay, you heard a bass line, you heard some drums. What is the effect that those patterns of notes have upon you? Why is it affecting you that way? Is it because they're using syncopation in a really, really focused, a really inventive way? Or is it simply because they have a specific sound, the sound of the drum kit? Is there a piece of material that's placed on the snare which changes the resonance? Or is the drummer crashing? Is he hitting the ride cymbal in such a way that it changes the dynamics of the rhythm section? Sorry, I seem to be like writing my next review as we. But that's what we have to do as music journalists. You know, that's the nitty gritty of it. You have to, certainly for me, you have to listen really intently, and then analyze yourself and analyze your own reaction to what you've heard. So it's a demanding but fascinating exercise.
You recently made a documentary about, have I pronounced this right? New Eurekan music.
Yeah.
Which that was on either Radio 3 or Radio 4, I can't remember, made with Simon Hollis, a really good producer. But there was a bit that, you interviewed some fascinating musicians, but there was a bit where you completely stripped music down and then added layer upon layer upon layer. It sounds just like what you've been talking about. How does this fit with that? Where does that come in? Yeah. And I just found it absolutely revelatory.
Well, I'm sure I can speak for Simon as well. That was really one of the high points of the recording process. And I think one of the high points of the program, and it resonates with what I've just been saying about my work as a music journalist, explaining, clarifying, highlighting the different components, and then trying to talk either the listener or the reader through this structure and how things lock together. And it's really interesting. I find particularly in black music the relationship between drums and bass to be such a compelling one, the way that they go back and forth, the conversation that they have, the conversation that in a broader sense the rhythm section might have with the horn section and with the vocalist, how all of these different actors on stage, if you want to be slightly metaphorical, they're cast members and they have to talk to one another. Sometimes they talk in unison without talking over each other. It's like, okay, you have a voice with horns coming in at the same time, sometimes doubling and sometimes underscoring what the voice is doing, and it works. Sometimes it's in counterpoint. Sometimes there might be a clash of keys. Sometimes it's really the different layers of sound. You can have you can have any amount of polyrhythms going on, lots of different rhythms being used at the same time. But also, I think in alliance with polyrhythm, you've just got a range of timbres. You know, have you got the sound of the piano? It could be the left hand, a very, very bassy left hand in salsa, being heard going into your ears at exactly the same time as you hear this very high clacking sound of the clave, of the wood. So think of the dynamic range of that. Also with a heavy acoustic bass, really, really low, very rich kind of velvety tones. And then you've got this snapping high sound from the clave at the same time. So that dynamic range is really wide, and that creates a sense of magic, because we're being engaged. It's like we're being engaged from many different areas at once, and
it's not a sort of singer singing and there's all this stuff in the background. The singer is sort of woven into this richness.
It all has to work together. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I mean, the contradiction is that you can focus on any one specific part and think, wow, bass player, pianist, percussionist, timbali player. I mean, a timbali player on his own, on their own, in isolation, it's a sight to behold, the way that they play, and it's a sound to behold as well. But if you have a timbale player, could be soloing while the great Celia Cruz is singing. I don't think we included it on the program, but there's an amazing track. It's a salsa anthem called Bemba Colorada by Celia Cruz. And I think we did record me reacting to the sight of a mural, of Celia Cruz in New York, and just thinking, oh my God, this is the queen of salsa. You know, this Cuban woman who was a diva. Really, I mean, more than the queen of salsa. I mean, her voice is just extraordinary, and this mural is really, it shows all of the reverence in which she's held in the Latino community in New York. And I think about the first Celia Cruz song that I ever heard, which was Bemba Colorada, which is this magnificent anthem, and you've got such an incredibly rich interaction of her voice and the band and the horns and percussion. It's the way that all of these different elements, crisscrossing, overlapping, moving in and out of focus. Sometimes her voice dominates, sometimes she comes back a bit. You also have the backing singers. The sheer complexity of it is dizzying. You know, how these arrangements are written for that. And I think that came across in the program as well, is that it's great music to dance to, but this is not easy music to play. It's not easy music to actually create in the first place. So that, I think of the recent broadcasts and radio programs that I've made, that was the one of the most enjoyable. And then, funnily enough, earlier on in the year, I did a special program it was a kind of a celebration of the music of Tito Puente, who was a great Puerto Rican timbale player, a multi-instrumentalist as well. He played vibraphone and piano and many different instruments, but he was known as El Rey del Timbal. So he was this demon timbales player, and he worked a lot with Celia Cruz as well. So it's been a very Afro-Latin year for me. And again, this is very personal because my aunt lives in Brooklyn in New York, and I first went there as a teenager. I think I would have been maybe 14 or 15 years old, and that's where I first heard salsa, because she had Puerto Rican friends, and I distinctly remember being in a car in New York with one of these Puerto Rican guys blasting salsa out of the car stereo, and me just sat there beside him as a kid thinking, damn, this is cool. This is like, I hadn't heard music like this before, you know, those like really, really explosive horns, high grassy horn figures with the singing, which is just coming right from the gut, and it's just it was an experience that really made a huge impression on me. So
a formative experience. Well, I mean, I've always looked at you for recommendations for things musical and literary, and fairly recently you got me onto you recommended Earl Lovelace's book, Back to the Carnival Again, The Dragon Can't Dance. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about that. That came out in the 90s. So he's a great Trinidadian novelist, but a lot of that book is really about what you've been saying, all of the meaning of music, the meaning of carnival. It just goes beyond, we're going to have fun today or whatever. So the dragon can't dance. The central figure, it's actually quite exactly what you've been saying. There are quite a few characters in this novel, and they work in counterpoint and overlap. Yeah. But there is the character who he always takes the role of the dragon. So it's kind of a figure through the book. He's making his costume.
That's right, Aldrich. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Well, as I said, Carnival, you have to understand that it's the heartbeat and the rhythm of Trinidad all year round. You know, there's that time of the year, those couple of days where you have that explosion of energy, or this release of pent up feelings. And one of the reasons why it's so intense is because people have to work on their costumes or work on their arrangements for steel band all year round. And then I remember one of the key lines in the book for me, I think it comes early on when either Aldrich or is it Fisheye? I can't remember which character. It's been a while since I read the book, but they talk about, and these are the specific words, they talk about the panic of being ready for Carnival. Think about that for a moment. You know, this joyous celebration, or this celebration that we think of as being really exuberant and joyous, you know, underlying the kind of prelude to it all is this sense of anxiety and panic, because you not only have to be ready, but you have to make this the best day of your life to a certain extent. Every year it's got to be the best day of your life. It's got to be something really, really special. So you're always working against the clock, and you're always thinking about, okay, how is this year going to be in relation to last year? And there's the sense of engagement as well that quote unquote ordinary people have with Carnival. It's a different form of participation. It's not just a question of going to Carnival like we do in this country and you can stand there and watch. I mean, you really have to take part. So again, what's revealing is when in Trinidad somebody says to you, well, what band are you in? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're a musician. It means that you'll be following a specific steel band, that you'll be jumping up behind them, and you'll be wearing the T-shirt that designates this particular band. So you're participating in a much more direct way than I think a lot of people participate at Notting Hill Carnival. So it's not just about being a spectator. It's about being part of the action as well.
Yes, Aldrich has to make his costume, his dragon costume, which he is famous for. So he's a sort of ordinary guy, but he's famous during the Carnival period. He is the dragon. And there's another character, the person he is rather sadly in love with, the young girl, Sylvia. She has to have a great costume. And with Sylvia, there's this idea that time is kind of running out because she'll get snapped up by one of the guys, you know, and then will it be Aldrich? You know, he kind of wants it to be. She has her sights set somewhere else, and this tension, this panic, and yet at the same time, it's an incredibly enjoyable book. It is about the love of life, the joy in music, There is there's a Calypsonian singer, isn't there? He's in love with somebody else. And then Fisheye, you mentioned Fisheye.
Yeah.
He's the dark side of all of this.
Well, yes and no. I mean, Fisheye is what we call in Trinidad the bargain, which is a roughneck, hoodlum, bad boy, somebody who ends up on the wrong side of the law. And yes, he gets sucked into criminal behavior, yet at the same time, he represents a sense of possibility. He is a chance for redemption of the ordinary, of the very disenfranchised black working classes in Trinidad. Redemption through the steel band movement. If he can bring, because he's trying to broker a peace between the various steel bands who historically there's been tension between them. I mean, this is a real thing in Trinidad where the level of competition was so fierce. And also, it has to be said, the living conditions of some of the original steel bands or members of steel bands in these horrendous ghettos in Laventil, in Port of Spain, or behind the bridge, these areas where basically the ex-slave population was just dumped and given very few resources or amenities and really disenfranchised. So the bargain figure or the steel band player who might be quick with his fists, who's violent, etc. There's a specific socio-political context for that. They're not just thugs; they're really disadvantaged people. And I think what Lovelace is doing throughout the book is showing, he's not shying away from the inherent violence of a character like Fisheye, but he's showing his humanity and he's showing that wider context as to why violence is an integral part of his life and how it can possibly be redirected and sublimated and channeled in a much more positive way through steel bands. I think for me that's such an important part of the book, where the music can have this redemptive, uplifting quality. Ultimately, and this is Lovelace's skill as a writer, he kind of gives us this sharp reality check with Fisheye, I think, hijacking a police van and taking a couple of police officers hostage, and this huge, great big standoff that you have on the hill, just the location where the action takes place, Calvary Hill. There's another message there, the symbolism, the martyrs up on Calvary Hill. But I think he can rightly lay claim to have written a great novel because there is humanity and there is compassion, but there's not sentimentality. That's why it made such a huge impact on me when I read it. And certainly as somebody with Trinidadian parents, and I lived in Trinidad as a child as well, I just thought to myself, this is real. This is all so real. He's not pulling any punches here. He's talking about real things as he knows them, as he experienced them himself. And he's given credence to this idea that to really depict somebody in an empowering way is to lay bare their faults and shortcomings, and to not be overly respectful. To actually show that these people can be dangerous, yet at the same time they come from a dangerous environment. They come from an environment which can breed a certain amount of danger as well. So the character of Fisheye is really, really important in the whole book. I mean, there's that amazing scene as well where he's in a cafe, and Lovelace gives us such a clear sense of his psychological makeup, what's going through his mind, how he works, and he just says at the end of his, I think he's eaten a roti or a chana or a snack or something like that, and he just says, "I'm not paying." there's something inside him at that point in time, which is this protest at the whole world for what he's going through in his life, and this bullheaded behavior that he has. I mean, obviously he's not supposed to do that, but the skill of the writing is that you can have a certain amount of empathy for him at that point in time. It's like, okay, you're living in a pressure cooker. You know, these are human beings who are being subjected to extreme circumstances, and there has to be a chain of consequences. There has to be a chain of events as a result, and that's what the Dragon Can't Dance is. That chain of events in relation to a very specific environment that takes its toll on people. But in the midst of that, what have you got? You've got this incredible flurry of humor. Oh my God, the humor it's so hilarious. From the opening scene where you have the stoning on the hill, and the victim is like, what, you know, why are you guys throwing boulders at me? Why can't you just throw little pebbles at me?
Oh, that's the opening, isn't it? It's somebody who wants to be Christ-like, and then
it's hilarious. I mean, the humor in the book is really something else. It's very special.
Yeah, every incident is telling. Every line of dialogue, you know, everything's in there for a reason. So it's a beautifully constructed and quite complex novel.
Totally,
as well.
It's very layered, very layered indeed. It's I mean, it's about Carnival, but it's about so much more than Carnival. Yeah. Carnival is the lifeblood of the novel, but the whole, like, the body of the novel, like the moving limbs. History of Trinidad, history of a post-colonial society. I'd also say the aftermath of colonialism, the effects of colonialism, racial discrimination, complex race relations in Trinidad. There's the Indian character, Pariag as well, the fact that he's a marginal figure in a black community. It's just Earl Lovelace, he really went there with this. It's one of the great novels of Trinidad. Because it's telling you, I'm sure you understand so much more about Trinidad having read this book, even though, as far as I know, you've never been there.
No, exactly. Yeah.
It gives you so much of an insight into. When people ask me about Trinidad, I always say it's complicated. You know, there's no other way I can put it. It's just very, very complex. It's an incredibly vibrant culture. It's life-enhancing, yet at the same time, it's challenging as well. And the colonial history, if you think about the inevitably complex identity that has to flow from an island that has had Spanish, French, Portuguese, British colonization, as well as, let's not forget, the presence of the original indigenous population and the way that that's pervaded culture as well, the Arawaks and the Carib Indians. You have people from the Middle East in Trinidad, you've got the Chinese diaspora in Trinidad, as well as the Asian diaspora, obviously, the indentured labor after slavery. It's incredible when you think about it, you know, in terms of historical data. There's really. I always say, when people ask me about Trinidad, I say, well, it's a huge part of the world in a small space. That's it.
Yeah.
At an extraordinary moment in time.
Yeah.
You know, 17th, 18th, 19th century, when the world is going through seismic change, and you've got this nation being built in the midst of that change. But with, as I say, these again, it's like many parts of the Caribbean. It's really the essence of Creole culture, where you have this interweaving of several cultures with all of the richness and the contradictions and the complexity that you would expect to come from that.
Let us we'll go back to our Penguin classic, because a book that we both love very much. So we'll wrap up by a discussion of this book. Yeah, The Lonely Londoners, Sam Selvon. And I thought this would be a good thing to discuss because it is the centenary year of his birth. He was born in 1923. I sort of read this sort of back in the day because I like novels of London, different aspects of London. And so one thing about The Lonely Londoners is it's not a sad book. It sounds like it's going to be a sad book. It's definitely got poignancy.
Yeah, poignant is the word.
But it's not, it's also hilarious and full of heart and humour. But to me, it's anybody who comes to London from the outside is a lonely Londoner until they find their place. And that's what I love about it. Yeah, you've got to find your tribe. You've got to think, how am I going to cope in this metropolis? So it's much wider than its ostensible subject, but the subject matter is indeed wonderful and great. So it's 1950s. It's set in the 50s.
Yeah.
I love the whole 50s vibe anyway. Yeah. But yeah, I know it means a lot to you.
It means a great deal to me on many levels. It was the first novel that I read, the first serious literature, where I heard the voice of my parents, where I could hear my father and my mother, uncles, cousins from Trinidad, actually seeing the way they speak on the printed page as a written word was an absolute revelation, because I didn't grow up in a particularly literary household. So this book wasn't around when I was growing up. I think, my parents were much more into music than they were literature, even though they do like reading. And certainly when I was at school in the 80s, there wasn't any Black history as such, an awareness of Black history at that point in time. So there was nobody around to say, oh, there's this great novelist from Trinidad called Sam Selvon, who's written this amazing book called The Lonely Londoners, which is very relevant to you as somebody born in this country to Trinidadian parents, as somebody who's lived in Trinidad as well. That recommendation wasn't around. So I came to it relatively late in the 90s, and it just absolutely blew my mind, because I thought, okay, well, this is it. He's, on the one hand, he's telling it like it is, the degree of realism and accuracy in the dialogue in particular. His ability to create this picaresque, rocambolesque, just incredibly colorful dialogue. I mean, the dialogue is a form of music. Mm-hmm. There's such beauty in the dialogue, the rhythm, the color. It's what we were saying right at the beginning of the conversation. Polyrhythm and, all the color in timbre that comes with it. I mean, there's so much color and humor as well in the way that he creates dialogue. But I think also in this idea of having a cast of characters, like a crew, collective, little community, the fellas, the boys, Moses, Galahad, the choice of, I think when I came across the page where it's like, okay, you got a character called Galahad, and then I thought, but wait a minute, that is totally Carnival, that's totally Calypso. If you think about the bravado that you have to be a Calypso singer, the bravado, the sense of daring, the boldness, the bold-facedness, as we'd say, to call yourself Lord Kitchener, to call yourself Attila the Hun, to call yourself Roaring Lion, or these other Mighty Sparrow, these amazing Calypso names, and that's it. It's like Galahad could be a Calypsonian, really. Yeah. From his name alone. And then I think Moses is our guide, narrator. But also, again, he didn't choose that name by chance. What does Moses do? lead the people
Leads
out
his
of Denver.
people. Yeah.
You know, so that kind of biblical undertone that you have in the book, the sense of something which has a great deal of gravitas. You know, it's telling the story of this group of young men, of young black migrants in Trinidad, yet black migrants in London, yet at the same time, he's kind of representing a whole country and countries. I feel that it's not just a great Trinidadian novel, it's a great West Indian novel and a great black diasporan novel as well.
Well, there's a great, there's so many sort of funny and satiric touches, but one of the things that it touches on is the tabloid press and the reaction. So just as a guy is arriving at, I think, Waterloo Station, and he's expecting, I think, one member of his family, and the whole family come off the train, and he is absolutely distraught because he knows that they'll all expect him to sort everything out for them. And then at that point, a journalist comes up. And in a way, you can kind of see the tabloid scare story being written in the 1950s. Yeah. They're all coming over here, entire families. And actually, this guy is going, no, I told you to stay. Yeah. I think they're Jamaicans, actually, those characters. And then the other aspect is the way that the tabloids describe everybody as Jamaican.
Yeah. Well, I mean, coming back to Don't Stop the Carnival, one of the things that emerged from the research is exactly that Jamaica became the prism through which the West Indies was seen, or Jamaica became the default West Indian representation.
Yeah.
So there was, I found some archive material in the British Library. It was from a newspaper, I think, in the early 50s, and the headline was, wait for it, the headline was Our Jamaican Problem. So this sense of migration from the West Indies in particular, posing some kind of a threat to society, but that being boiled down to the figure of the Jamaican. The Jamaican becomes this threat to society. I mean, that was the way it was basically framed. And I think absolutely Selvon, very, very aware of that, of the machinations and the cynicism, if not the outright racism of the tabloid press, and he confronts that. But also, I mean, I remember this very, very funny, yet at the same time deadly serious kind of cod philosophical discussion about, you know, why it's difficult to be black. Because the white world needs something other than itself to react against, kind of thing. You know, they sort of go into these quite convoluted discussions about, okay, well, you know, what is it about being black that is so difficult, in inverted commas? And then I think he's really poking fun at the idiotic nature of racism, yet at the same time he's exposing that as a reality. You know, this is something which is very real. And given the fact that in the late 50s there were race riots in Notting Hill, you know, this is so close to the knuckle. This is so on the money, and that you also had the completely ghastly phenomenon of Rackmanism, of the slum landlord who puts 10 or 15 people into dilapidated housing at the time of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. You know, Rackman would exploit the desperation of migrants to find accommodation at that point in time. And again, doing the research for Don't Stop the Carnival, I spoke to people who were around at that point in time, and they said it was so desperate that accommodation for black people at that point in time, it was so scarce and it was so difficult to be accommodated that in some places in Notting Hill, they would have to sleep outside, sort of up on a terrace on a tall building, and there'd be a washing line that would be strung up, and the adults would sleep on one side and the children would sleep on the other side, because finding somebody to rent you a room at that point in time. And it's a historic, I think it was a BBC documentary called Does Britain Have a Colour Bar, where they send a reporter undercover and he's knocking on the doors of rooming houses, people who have rooms to rent, and there's a hidden camera, and he asks about accommodation for this is a black reporter, and he asks about getting a room. Door slammed on his face, and then at one point there's a landlord who says to him, look, I really would like to rent you a room, but if I did, then my other tenants would leave. So, we think about this as, I think, an important framework for the Lonely Londoners, and also Andrea Levy's Small Island as well.
Yeah.
There's a continuity there, which is important. So you have this very emotionally charged background. I mean, I think that struggle against a racist society, I mean, it's right there in the marrow of the book. Again, and this is a parallel with Lovelace, Selvon is such a skilled writer that to a certain extent he deflects attention away from that with all of this humor and with all of this, just the sheer vibrant nature of the characterization. And then it's almost as if those messages about the racism, about the inequality, about the sheer idiotic nature of it, they kind of seep into your subconscious, and it's kind of there, and you carry it away with you after you read the book. Maybe that's me going into music journo mode. Well, what's left once you've actually read it, in the same way that what's left once you've actually listened to a piece of music. I think it's all there. That commentary on racial discrimination is very much part of the book.
And a lot of it, as you say, is done through the dialogue, because as the newcomers arrive, the old hands are there to kind of give advice and try here, try there.
Steer them through.
There's a great scene in a labour exchange, but one of the characters says to a newcomer about the white British, they keep saying that we've come to take their jobs, but that doesn't make any sense because nobody will give us a job.
Right. There you go.
I mean, it's expressed much more elegantly, and more in the patois in the book. But
yeah, but Suzi, that's the perfect example of what I'm talking about, where you have a deadly serious point there. Oh, they come over here, they take our jobs, they take our women, blah blah blah, and all the rest of it. But look at what's actually happening. There are jobs at the labour exchange, and there was full employment at one point, in the post-war period. But these jobs aren't good enough for us. They're only good enough for black people who've come from. In fact, again, this is something that I learned when I was doing the research, that they were ex-military, ex-West Indian ex-servicemen. My father was a West Indian ex-serviceman as well, even though this is later in the 60s. That basically they were qualified, they were skilled, but they would be offered these horrible factory jobs, which were frankly beneath them. And that was part of the syndrome. That was part of the soul-destroying experience of being black at that point in time. And again, I mean, that's a great example. I'm glad you mentioned that. It really encapsulates that. But he's such a nimble, such a virtuosic writer that he's making you laugh while he's putting his finger on this essential point about deep-rooted racism. And again, I can't stress this enough, that the lack of logic behind it, that's the strength of his writing, is that he's exposing these contradictions, or these things that don't make much sense, or don't make any sense at all.
And also woven in, when you say he's a virtuoso, he really is, because he has the dialogue, as we've talked about, is you can just hear the voices in your head, you can hear the lilt of the speech, and that also flows into some of the actual narrative. And then at other times you think, well, who is the narrative voice? Is it Sam Selvon? It's very cleverly done. But then there are these wonderful lyrical passages that are just about London, and especially about Hyde Park, and going into Hyde Park and liming and meeting your friends, and they are really lyrical passages. So we have some down and dirty stuff, but we have this sort of joy of being in London in the sunshine, the fact that you can get a little bit of joy out of every day.
Well, again, that's the strength of the narrative, being able to find these moments of release and relief, which you can relate that again back to Carnival. The sense of an event which brings you joy before you go back to the daily grind. And I think you can also make the point that even though this is very, very character driven, The Lonely Londoners, as a title, tells its own story, it's also a great depiction of the city, and of what makes London appealing, regardless of all the challenges. It's the mark of a great novelist when you're able to humanize something which is inanimate, a city with buildings, with a physical environment. It's like he's bringing it to life as an additional character in the book. Hyde Park and those scenes, they always make me think of the savannah in Port of Spain, which is like a huge national park where people lime and people hang out. And if you were to ask people about iconic spaces in Port of Spain, they would definitely mention the savannah. It's a really beautiful park. And I think being able to say, well, okay, the city, in the midst of all of the challenges that it poses to especially Black migrants, and all of the stress and the strain which is inherent to the city, nonetheless the city has beauty, and nonetheless the city has these it will give these moments of solace. And I think in terms of the contrasts which make the novel so interesting, the city itself and the specific places in the city, again, that's all part of the magic. And again, I don't know that much about his life, but from what I understand, he really knew London well. I think he lived in West London, and you get the sense that this is somebody who, he was not just a lonely Londoner, but a committed Londoner. He was a Londoner through and through, as much as he was a Trinidadian. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, they all become Londoners one way or another, and become part of the story of the city. And I would argue that with a character called Galahad, and there's somebody else who's always searching for a woman called Beatrice, I think we have these little, I can't help thinking Selvon was very well read, very sophisticated in terms of understanding narrative. And I keep hearing these little hints, like that's King Arthur in Galahad, Dante and Beatrice, especially since one of the characters does say, London is hell. We're in hell, and suddenly you think, well, there is a Dante-esque echo there, and I'm sure, it's all part of the immense sophistication and yet lightness of this novel, which is not a huge novel, but it's a really stunning piece of work. I'm glad we both agree on that. So that's Sam Selvon on the back, looking very, very keen and handsome. I am going to ask you my 3 questions.
Sure.
Now, we have discussed this before, but what is your favourite artwork? Is the first. Do you have it handy?
I have it to hand. My favourite artwork is this.
Yes, perfect.
So if I
Perfect.
zoom in, can you?
I can see that. So that is the great Miles Davis.
The sleeve of Tutu.
Yeah.
Which was an early album purchase for me back in the 80s. A revelation in many ways. I think that was the first time that I'd heard. That was the first time that I'd heard him play, and all of the information that we might take for granted these days about his incredible journey through music from the late 40s going into the 50s, Kind of Blue, and these landmark albums that he'd made, the way he was changing music through his innovations and all the rest of it. I wasn't aware of any of that at all. Jazz funk DJs used to play this record because it's very funky. It's got an amazing bass player, Marcus Miller, on it, who produced the record as well. So as far as I was concerned, this was just like the latest funk from a guy who was making a good first record. You know, even though he played God knows how many, probably about 30 before that. And I was just totally captivated by the music, totally captivated by that picture as well. I just thought that he projected so much power as well as so much grace. And I think because I have cousins in Trinidad who are very dark-skinned as well, it reminded me of them for some reason. It reminded me of some of the people that I knew in Trinidad, friends and family members. And I thought that, I mean, there's a celebration of blackness. It's a black and white monochrome photograph, but it's also it's the pride in being black that he projects in that picture. Such power, such, you know, here I am, and I'm not backing down. It's something almost confrontational about the way that he's looking at the camera. So I was totally struck by that. And then also, again, this is because I bought it when it came out, and I think it's either 86 or 87, and I was at Lancaster University doing my first degree, and I was becoming interested in politics, and the fact that the album is called Tutu became part of my political awakening, because it's a tribute to Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was one of the leaders of the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. And I remember at the time buying this mug in the campus shop at Lancaster University, which was an anti-apartheid mug, you know, support the ANC, end apartheid, etc. And I bought that around about the same time as I bought Tutu. So there's a kind of serendipity there. The two things sort of reinforced each other quite unexpectedly. So this album also makes me think about politics, and it makes me think about that really important period in the 80s where an awareness of what was happening, you know, we can't take that for granted. It took years for people to really learn about and really care about apartheid. You know, for so many years it was not on the agenda at all, certainly not in the mainstream. And I think for people of my generation, it was a defining moment in politics. There's this completely evil regime in South Africa. It's called apartheid, complete separation of black and white, and people are being killed and imprisoned as a result. And then obviously you had Mandela becoming a phenomenon. But Tutu and Miles Davis calling the album Tutu, you know, making that reference was hugely important. And years later, I did an interview with Marcus Miller, the bass player and producer, and he talked about the conversations that they had and how committed Miles was to anti-apartheid. I think he's also on another, it's a protest record called Sun City. I'm not going to play Sun City, like Artists Against Apartheid, and he's on it as well. So all these things kind of fitted together. The fact that he was calling the album Tutu, and that later on he he plays on an anti-apartheid record as well.
So it's all great. The image sums up the content, and the content expresses the image, and it's hugely
each reinforces the other.
Yeah. Excellent. What we've talked a bit about books, but are there any books that you have yet to read that you feel a little bit guilty about not having?
I still have pangs of guilt at not having completed. I've only read certain passages of War and Peace. And I think just the sheer size of it. If somebody wants to do a cheeky but effective edit, a little bit of war and a lot of peace, perhaps.
I'm sorry, Leo. We really need to edit this book of yours. Well, I think I've always thought it's 2 books in one. You could get rid of all the theorizing about war. The character stuff is absolutely great.
Well, I mean, we're just talking about great character-driven novels. So if we could have peace characters, Mr. Tolstoy, if somebody can resurrect him and get him to do peace characters, the War and Peace remix, then I'm totally up for it.
Yeah, the remix, not the director's cut.
Not the director's cut, no.
Definitely not. And finally, have you ever had any weird or funny or silly feedback about any aspect of your work?
Can I pull the rug from under your feet and say the funniest, most memorable feedback and comment that I've had about
I hope it wasn't me.
From Suzi Faye. When I wrote I think it would have been my very first piece for the Independent on Sunday. I thought long and hard about this. It's like, what's the It's Suzi Faye, but no, fear not, it's a good one. Okay. And it was a piece about the poetry scene and spoken word, and my good friend and award-winning poet from Trinidad, Roger Robinson,
yeah.
Within that piece, I think possibly with patients like Barbie and Malika Booker. I think so. I mean, this is going back over 20 years.
Mm.
And Roger in fact, I was working for Apples and Snakes at the time as well. Had a gig there as the publicity person, and it took me a while to finish it. And you got me to do a little bit of jiggery pokery and rewrites and all the rest of it. And I was like, wow, this is a marathon session. And I remember saying to you, I feel as if I've climbed Mount Everest, Suzi. And you said, I've been your faithful Sherpa. You see? You know it's true. Because over 20 years later, those words are still very, very clear in my mind. And I can tell from your reaction that you said that. And I just thought, yeah, that's it,
Has the ring of truth. I am very happy to carry your packs up any mountain.
Perfect relationship between writer and editor. We're sailing this mountain together.
Yeah. And yes, I don't want to take the memoir. I don't want to take the metaphor further than it needs to go, but the Sherpa sort of steps back at the summit.
Right.
And says, you get the summit. You know.
We can plant the flag together.
Oh, we summited together on that occasion. Kevin, it has been brilliant talking to you as ever. Looking forward to the next volume of Don't Stop the Carnival. But you make radio documentaries, you review all over the place. You have a lot on, but it has been brilliant chatting. So thank you very much for joining me in the book bag.
Really my pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you, everyone watching this wonderful session. We've covered a lot of ground: music, books, history, the diaspora. It's been really great. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please do like and subscribe, and join me next time when I have another wonderful author in the book bag. Thanks for watching.